This is the moment you all truly have been waiting for.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're back with another episode of Talkin MMA, episode number 15. Be sure to hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, and we're going to get right into it. Right off the top of the show, I want to say that we are now Team Manscape. So if you enjoy Manscape products, which you should, of course, are the best products on earth, use my code, TALKMMA. That is TALKMMA for 20% off on the website. Check that out. So yeah, guys, for this week's show, we got a lot to talk about, right? We just had Ufc Vegas 53 with Cheeto Vera versus Rob Font. And now we got UFC 274, which is a very big card now coming up this Saturday. And we're about to have on now in a matter of moments now. Any minute now, we're about to have Todd Atkins on, a guy who's a mixed martial arts content creator like myself. He's on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and other platforms. We're going to talk to him about his early involvement in mixed martial arts. We're going to talk to him about UFC 274, break that down a little bit. So let's get right to it. After that, we're going to get into an even deeper dive into the whole UFC 274, finish with some MMA news. So without further ado, here's Todd Atkins. I want to get right into it because you seem to be a diehard mixed martial arts fan, but somebody who's more importantly been around for a long time, been watching the game for a long time. When did you start watching mixed martial arts?
UFC 2 in 1993.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Long time ago. And as far as your content, is that the stuff that you focus on? You focus on like the early stuff of MMA?
Well, I mean, like most people that got into it at that time, I had a friend that rented it at Blockbuster Video, and he kind of told some of us about it. So I went and rented it. You know, I watched it with my father. I used to watch a lot of the Kung Fu type movies from Hong Kong and stuff like that before then.
Were you into Pride?
Yeah, I mean, I lived in Japan also. Yeah, I lived in Japan from 2002 to 2005. So, yeah, I went to a lot of Pride events.
Yeah, absolutely.
But, so, obviously I followed the early UFC. Then I got stationed on Oahu. You know, I was in the military. And they had events there. The first one I saw was Ultimate Explosion, which Kimo Leopoldo fought Brian Johnson in the main event. And then they had an event called Super Brawl that was a regular event. And so I would go to those events. I knew the promoter pretty well, TJ Thompson. And so I was around a lot of fights there. I knew a lot of people from them, from training and also from just being around the sport. Same with Japan. You know, when I lived in Japan, I went to events all the time. I mean, there were tons of events in Japan at that time. And there still are. It's just maybe not getting as much attention, but I went to things like Pride, Pancrase, Cheeto, K1, Shoot Boxing, which was one of my favorite ones, which was kind of like a standing event with the standing throws and submissions were allowed. So, yeah, just lots of different events.
Yeah. And when did you start getting into the interviews on your channel and all that stuff?
I think it was January of 2020, right before the pandemic is when I started doing it. I remember that.
Yeah. Is there any fighters specifically you like to interview? Any ones you're trying to reach out to?
Well, when I first started doing it, I was doing mostly old school guys that from my era because I knew a lot of those people personally. So it was easier for me to talk to them because I knew them already. And but then since then I've kind of branched out. I still like to do that because it's just those people were around the sport as long as me, but they're also from a time that a lot of people newer to the sport maybe aren't too familiar with. But I talk to all kinds of people, whether it be new fighters, old fighters, announcers, promoters. I'm going to talk to a doctor here in about an hour. So female fighters, I've been doing some lately. So, yeah, just a little of everything these days.
So we talked a little bit about Pride. You know, obviously we got a guy who's prominently known in Pride and Shogun, right? That's competing on this card this weekend, UFC 274. I kind of want to jump into that a little bit. Looks like a pretty good card here. What's your take on that first fight, Cerrone versus Lozon? You know, obviously two guys that have been around, right?
Right. I think those two fights, Cerrone versus Lozon and Shogun versus
St.
OSP.
Yeah.
Yeah. So both of those fights, when you have guys that are older, maybe can't do all the things they used to be able to do. A lot of it depends on, and Cerrone kind of alluded to this in his interviews, who kind of shows up ready to fight, you know, whether they want to be there, whether they're in it mentally. Some of the intangibles may play a bigger role in both of those fights because both these guys aren't, you know, can't do the things that they used to do effectively at the same level. So those ones will probably be harder to really pick an outcome.
I feel the same way.
Because like sometimes he shows up, Cerrone looks like he's really ready to go, and other times he doesn't look like he's ready to go at all. Lozon, I would say Lozon has always been a ground fighter. You know, he was always known as a guy who was good on the ground even before he started fighting. You know, he had a reputation out of Massachusetts. A lot of the guys who started kind of the internet forums, the early internet forums, were based out of Massachusetts. Keurig Janis and Chris Palmquist, and Lozon trained with those guys. So he already had kind of a reputation on the internet forums because those guys were running those forums at the time. And he's always been a ground guy, I would say. Cerrone's good on the ground, but
definitely
stand-up's a strong point. So it'll be interesting to see who can make the fight the way they want it. I think the other fight's a little bit more even because those guys are mostly stand-up guys, I would say.
It's interesting, too, because when we look at both these fights, it's not like you're getting one of these older guys who've been around who's fighting up-and-comer. It would be a lot easier because, you know, you'd sort of be able to get more of a clear-cut decision there because the up-and-comer might be more explosive, more athletic at that point in his career. But like you said, it's four guys here that have been around, right, that maybe aren't as skilled athletically as they once were younger in their career. Do you think that either of these fights, it's like, you know, obviously we know Cerrone's going to retire, right, after this fight, which only brings me to another question of, you know, Cerrone, you just alluded to, sometimes doesn't show up, right? And I think it's the big stages sometimes that kind of get to him, like the McGregor fight. But this is a fight where they're putting him back onto a main card of a pay-per-view, and it's a retirement fight for him. He's getting a lot of attention in the media now, so is it a fight where he's going to show up? It's interesting.
Yeah, plus he said it's the first fight his son's going to be at. So it'll be interesting to see how he performs because he kind of made that a focal point of his interview.
He's super emotional about it.
So it'll be interesting to see if that affects him. He kind of made it seem like that's going to have a big impact on him. He seemed to make it seem that way.
Yeah, I agree with that. If you watched the press conference, he definitely wasn't hiding that. So what I was going to ask you originally before that was, do you think that these two fights, it's like, because obviously we know Cerrone's retiring again. You think that these two fights is sort of kind of like loser is done? So like, let's say Joe Lozon loses, right? We already know Cowboy's losing. If Joe Lozon loses, do you think that could be it for him in the UFC? And then same for the St. Prover's Rue of Shogun fight. You think that could be it for either one of those fights?
Well, I don't know because a lot of that depends on their contract and if they want to keep competing. So really that would probably depend more up to the promoters. I mean, I think it's always a possibility in the fighter's mind when they're that old and maybe they have a bad loss or a few bad losses. They could always say they're done. But relative to their contract, I don't know, you know, how many fights those guys have left, whatnot. You know, if they don't want to be finished, then it would be up to the UFC to decide that. So,
right, and that's why I asked, because obviously the whole contract thing is a one-way street with the UFC, right? Like they have all control, so they could just cut you whenever they want if they feel that you're done. If they gotten the best out of you.
Yeah, it's definitely a possibility that they could do that for any of those guys.
Definitely. So next fight, we got a fight that's it's one of the more exciting fights in the card, right? Michael Chandler versus Tony Ferguson. What's your take on that? That's certainly a big fight. Yeah,
I mean, that's interesting. You know, I just was talking about the two older guys who's going to show up. Here, I think it's the same. We're all wondering.
Similar case, yeah.
Is Tony show up? You know, is Tony ready to fight again, or is he, you know, his last few losses have been pretty bad? Is he going to get run over, or is he ready to show up and kind of be Tony Ferguson before? So in a way, even though these are two guys that aren't as old as the previous two fights we're talking about, that factor with Tony is there. I think Chandler's going to show up and fight the way he fights. You know, Chandler's an incredible athlete. You know, a guy who, you know, trains ridiculously hard and all that. He's going to fight. I'm not worried about him not showing up. I'm just wondering is he going to run over Ferguson, or is Ferguson going to be ready to fight him?
The thing about run over Ferguson is, I mean, Tony doesn't really get finished. You know, I mean, now we could maybe start to question, is he like 30, 38 now, something like that? Chandler's like 36, but as far as Tony goes, he's never been finished, really. I mean, the Gaethje fight was that was a stoppage, but he was still on his feet. Like, they just decided he couldn't take any more. So I don't know. I think I see more of a drag out fight, like a 3-round fight, because I don't see any. And Chandler showed he had a chin too. You know, I don't think Chandler's gonna get hit with anything in terms of power in this fight that he hadn't felt in the Gaethje fight. There's gonna be more unpredictable stuff, but power, I don't think it's any question Gaethje packs more of a punch than Ferguson. That's what I think. So.
Yeah.
I think we're going to see a 3-round fight here, a 3-round war. I don't know. That's just my opinion. But back to what you said, it is a similar fight to the Cerrone versus Lauzon fight because these guys aren't young pups either. Tony Ferguson's like 38. Michael Chandler's 36, if I'm not mistaken. So, yeah, these are guys. Tony Ferguson's on a 3-fight losing streak. He loses, that's four losses in a row. Michael Chandler's on a 2-fight losing streak. He loses, that's 3 in a row. So it could be a crossroads here too.
Yeah, you're right. Absolutely. It could be a crossroads for both. The reason I was saying Chandler would run over Ferguson is Chandler fights at a pretty high pace. He's kind of an explosive fighter. His movements are explosive. He comes out and, he fights pretty aggressively. Gaethje, he was with Trevor Whitman when that was like his first fight or maybe second fight with Trevor Whitman. He was kind of telling him to slow down, initially, after he was trying to kill him in the first couple of rounds, But Chandler, he fights really aggressively, so I wonder if it's a fight where Ferguson's taking a lot of punches or maybe Chandler's taking him down here and there and kind of mixing that too. If it's going to be to where he kind of cracks a little bit. That's what I was thinking because, Chandler's a pretty aggressive fighter. He doesn't really wait. He doesn't take his time to do what he's going to do. He comes after his opponent, especially since he got in the UFC. It's almost like he's fighting more of a low IQ fight and just to be entertaining. So he's fighting really aggressively, and he's done that. And all the fights he's had in the UFC so far, he's been very aggressive.
I agree with you 100%. Chandler has all the tools to be a world champion, to win fights. Like there's some of his fights, there was no excuses. Like the game plan against the Gaethje fight, like instead of just being smart and utilizing wrestling, trying to actually win the fight. I agree with you on that. But yeah, it's the thing about Chandler too is Chandler. We've seen Tony Ferguson get taken down by Kevin Lee and beaten up. We've seen Tony Ferguson be very susceptible to big shots, whether it's on the feet, on the ground. So, I mean, I don't think it's a question that Chandler's going to be able to get to him. But, yeah, it's going to be interesting nonetheless. I agree with you on that. So, the next fight, it's we got Rose Namajunas versus Carlos Barza, right? That's obviously the strawweight title fight. Any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I think Namajunas, I was just thinking about this a little while ago. I think there's not a lot of fighters who do everything well in mixed martial arts. I think fans think there are more people than there are. Namajunas is like that. Masaki's like that. There's a certain fighters that they can fight wherever they need to, or whatever their opponent's going to do. They can execute, whether it be wrestling or striking, jiu-jitsu, whatever. So I think that's why it's going to be hard for Barza to beat her, or for anybody to beat her. I mean, I know she lost once. She lost a fight where she got slammed, but it's difficult to beat her because she's so good everywhere, and I think Esparza's going to have a hard time beating her.
Yeah, and it almost seems like there's a cream of the crop to that division too. Like you look at Weili, Joanna, and Rose, it seems like they're almost levels ahead of the rest of the pack. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think it would take a specialist like I don't think Tatiana Suarez fights at that weight class, but what I'm talking about is somebody like that, where they're so good at one thing, wrestling preferably.
That's what I was thinking about.
Make it that fight for the whole fight. Someone like that could maybe beat Namajunas, but they would have to be like elite, because elite can beat somebody who's good at everything. But other people, if they're not elite at anything, it's going to be hard to beat someone like that, or hard to beat Masaki or GSP or someone who's good to great at everything. It's just real hard to beat them.
I agree, especially with the Tatiana Suarez thing. I'm a big fan of hers. I think she's one of like the very few female specialists, like true specialists in wrestling in UFC, at least for females. So I think she'd be a problem if she was, the injuries has just held her back. But I agree with that. Now we got the main event. It's Charles Oliveira versus Justin Gaethje. What do you think about this one?
Either guy could win. I mean, Gaethje has the power to knock anybody out, and Oliveira has the skills to beat him. Here's another guy that kind of like we're talking about with Nominess. Now, I wouldn't say he's great at wrestling, but he's good enough. He can get fights to the ground. He did against Ferguson. He's elite on the ground. His stand-up is getting better, so I think it'd be better for him to take Gaethje down because obviously he's a lot better than Gaethje there. But Gaethje can wrestle. I'm sure he's been working on that because his strategy is going to be to win the fight standing up. So it's going to be, can Gaethje get to Oliveira before Oliveira? Now, Oliveira probably will try to strike with him some. I don't know how much. He said he's going to. But I think it would be better for him to try to get the fight around because if he tries to get the fight down, it's like a percentages. Less danger for him if he gets the fight to the ground, a lot less. If he stands, there's a percentage chance he could lose while he's doing that. He might be able to win. I mean, he did stop Chandler, but to me, if he's able to get Gaethje down, the fight is his to win. But if he doesn't, Gaethje's got a chance to knock him out, of course, or bust him with the leg kicks too. Gaethje's real strong with the leg kicks. So if it's standing for long portions of the round, yeah, Gaethje could win the fight. Of course, either one of these guys could win the fight.
Yeah, it's definitely a close fight. I think Oliveira is definitely good enough to hold his own in the stand-up. He's shown it, especially coming up throughout his last 4 or 5 fights. He's definitely much improved in that department. But one thing about Oliveira that worries me, and I am picking him to win the fight because I think he will get this fight to the ground and just do what he does, get him out of there eventually. That's just what I think. But one thing that worries me about Oliveira is we obviously saw him get hurt bad against Chandler and Poirier, right? Is that something that's going to come back to life in the Gaethje fight? Right.
That's what I mean. I think if there's one guy you don't want to stand with in the UFC, it's Gaethje. He's got explosive kicks. He can knock people out with punches.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's just a guy that you don't want to stand with for too long. But when he's taken down, when like Khabib took him down, once he got him down, it was pretty easy for him to get to where he wanted to go. And I think it would be for Oliveira too, because he's very high level. So it's just who's going to do what. If Oliveira tries to, take the risk of standing to prove something, or he has trouble getting Gaethje down, then I think it's more favors Gaethje.
You think there's any chance Oliveira can get Gaethje in the stand-up if he starts threatening the takedown enough or threatening the submissions?
There's always a chance, with the 4-ounce gloves. There's always a possibility. But I think a standing fight is more percentage for Gaethje to win than him.
Yeah, I agree with that, absolutely. And Gaethje, there's only so many leg kicks you could take from Gaethje. Oliveira is very light on that lead foot, which is going to be a very good thing, particularly in this fight. But I think Gaethje, there's only so many of those you could take before you go out. So it's like Khabib, was taking a few of those, right? Took 4 or 5. He's like, all right, I have to take this fight to the ground. This thing's going to go south if I stay standing with this guy.
Yeah, precisely. Eventually, Khabib realized, I have to get this to where I have the highest percentage chance to win soon. I can't sit here and play in this area with this guy for much longer. I need to get to the ground, then the fight's mine. And that's what he did.
One last question about this one. Do you think Gaethje's a better fighter than he was when he lost to Khabib? Do you think he's improved?
Man, that's a tough question to answer. I mean, I don't. If I trained with him, I could know.
Because we saw the Chandler fight, right? Like, based off the Chandler fight, I mean, it's tough to say, right? Because Chandler didn't really fight very smart, and we just saw another Justin Gaethje war. But I think that's what my question is going into this one is because I think Oliveira is going to win. I think he's going to submit him. So it's going to be interesting to see if Justin Gaethje makes adjustments.
But that is kind of Justin Gaethje in his career. Even before he got in the UFC, that's what he was known for. When the war starts, that's when the fight starts. You know, that's kind of what he was always known for, kind of like Arturo Gatti in boxing.
Yeah, definitely.
When the war started, that's when he started fighting his best. And that's kind of how Gaethje is. In the UFC, he's knocked some guys out quicker to where he didn't have to have wars with them. Some of the guys. But he's had some wars too. So that's kind of his personality as a fighter, is get into a war. But I know they're trying to get that out of him, guys like Trevor Whitten. But sometimes it's not the best thing to do, is take what a guy does well out of his personality. You know, it's hard. And the other thing about this fight is when you have someone who can execute takedowns, or who's really dangerous on the ground. Now I know Gaethje's probably thinking, if I get taken down, it's not going to be my fight. You know, I'm probably going to lose this fight. Is that going to make him hesitant, you know, to do what he does? Because he lost to Khabib that way. And he knew the same thing in that fight. If I get taken down, it's his fight, not mine. So it's hard for a guy to pull the trigger as much when he knows the guy across from him has a huge advantage to beat him if he gets a takedown. So it'll be interesting to see how aggressive he is. Does he stay back? Does he try to kind of sprawl and brawl a little bit and not be too overly aggressive to put himself at risk of takedown? That will be interesting to see. Because I think with Chandler, it's different. Chandler, yes, he'd take Gaethje down or something, but it's not a thing where, I'm going to get submitted as soon as Chandler takes me down. I don't think he thought that. You know, he just thought, we'll scramble and we'll be back to our feet and we'll fight again. With Oliveira, it's different. If he's going to take you down, it's kind of like Khabib. If he's going to take you down, it's their fight now. You know, it's going to be over. And so it'll be interesting to see if that makes him hold back a little bit.
It's going to be a great fight. I can't wait for it. So thank you so much for joining the show, for talking a little bit with us. And where can people find you on all the platforms?
Well, I mostly do my interviews on Instagram. Okay. Which is like it's _Todd _Atkins _show. ATKINS is how you spell my last name. TODD is how you spell my first name. So, and then I have I put some shorter clips on TikTok, which is Todd Atkins Show. And then I have a YouTube channel, same thing, Todd Atkins Show. I put my interviews there after I've already done them. I put some clips there too. So I'd say those primarily. I do interact a little bit on TikTok or on Twitter, but I just put Todd Atkins in and A is the name. But most of my content would be on the other three. And then I do a show I just started with the guys from the Lights Out podcast, which is an old school podcast. And the three guys who do that podcast are Chris Lytle, obviously, Lights Out, Lytle, Mike Davis, who has been involved with a lot of promotions. Right now he's involved with Ignite Fights, and he's based out of Chicago. And then Miguel Iturrate. Miguel is also an old school guy. He was affiliated with a promotion called Hook and Shoot, Bodog Fight, Abu Dhabi, the original Abu Dhabi Combat. So these are three guys who've all been around now. Mostly it's me, Mike Davis, and Miguel right now because Chris Lytle's really busy. So we're kind of doing new stuff. And maybe once a week is when we're doing it. Occasionally if there's something really interesting to talk about. But what we're really trying to do is kind of come at some of these stories that angles that people maybe aren't aware of. And, Mike has a law enforcement background many years, so he has some insight into some different things that or ways of investigating things that other people maybe aren't privy to.
Sounds great. That's something that I'll definitely be turning into. Sounds something I would like. I appreciate the time, and thank you for coming on the show.
You're welcome. And it's called the MMA Conspiracy Hour, but it's on a channel on YouTube called Lights Out Clips, like LYTES Out Clips. And that's where you can find it. That's where they've been putting it. So, yeah, I appreciate you having me on. I love talking to you. And if you ever want to come on my show, let me know, man.
Yeah, absolutely. Be more than willing to. Definitely. All right. Thank you, Todd.
Yeah, you too. Take care. It's great talking with you.
Oh, sorry. I didn't see you there. See, I was busy reading up on how Manscaped saved my balls, but now that you're here, they might be able to do the same for you. Guys, support for your balls is brought to you by Manscaped, who is the best in men's below-the-waist grooming. The products are precise engineered tools for your family jewels. Manscaped's Performance Package, the ultimate men's hygiene bundle. Join over 4 million men worldwide who trust Manscaped with this exclusive offer for you. 20% off and free worldwide shipping with the code TALKMMA at manscaped.com. If my math is correct, that's about 8 million balls. Let me tell you a little story. Long time ago, guys, I was neglecting my balls. I was not treating them fairly, not treating them equally, not treating them as they should be treated. I was getting nicked, scuffed, bruised, battered, cut, whatever you want to say, all bad stuff down there. But you know what, guys? I switched to Manscaped, and now I don't neglect my balls anymore, and neither should you. So get Manscaped, guys. You won't regret it. This Performance Package 4.0 has arrived, and man, it's a game changer. Inside this package, you'll find their Lawnmower 4.0 trimmer, Weed Whacker ear and nose hair trimmer, Crop Preserve ball deodorant, and Crop Reviver toner, performance boxer briefs, and a travel bag to hold your goodies. First off, the Lawnmower 4.0, guys. This trimmer is the future of grooming, and dare I say the greatest ball trimmer ever? Their 4th generation trimmer features a cutting-edge ceramic blade to reduce grooming accidents thanks to their advanced skin-safe technology. The Lawnmower 4.0 is waterproof and also has a 400K LED spotlight. You need a more precise shave. Because this trimmer is waterproof, you could say goodbye to the mess on the bathroom floor. You thought that was good, but want to take your grooming game even further to the next level? The Performance Package 4.0 also includes the Weed Whacker nose, ear, and hair trimmer, guys. The Weed Whacker is also waterproof and provides proprietary skin-safe technology which helps reduce nicks, snags, and tugs in all those delicate nose holes. Their Crop Preserver ball deodorant and Crop Reviver ball toner will change the way you approach your hygiene routine. Trust me when I say this, fellas, your balls will thank you. Manscaped even threw in 2 free gifts to their Performance Package 4.0, the Manscaped Boxers and Shed Travel Bag. Bring your comfort and boxers to another level. It's time to take care of yourself. So go to Manscaped and get 20% off plus free shipping with code TALKMMA. Get 20% off and free shipping with the code TALKMMA at manscaped.com. That's 20% off plus free shipping at manscaped.com and use that code TALKMMA. Unlock your confidence and always use the right tools for the job with Manscaped. All right, so that was Todd Atkins who joined us there to break down UFC 274, talk a little bit about his channel. A guy who's been around in terms of MMA content creation. He's been out there with the interviews. He's been talking about just the sport of mixed martial arts, especially the early days. He's got his show, so it was good for him to join us. It was good to get perspective from the outside about this card. And let's dive a little bit deeper into this card, and we'll go into our main card picks as well. Let's start off at the bottom. Again, Donald Cerrone versus Joe Lauzon. This is an interesting fight because it's not the young dog, the young pup versus the old dog here. It's 2 guys who've been around, 2 old dogs who Cowboy Cerrone we know is about to retire after this fight. Joe Lauzon, I mean, could Joe get cut if he loses this fight from the UFC? Because similar to the Mauricio Shogun Rua fight and the Ovince St. Preux, Mauricio Shogun Rua versus Ovince St. Preux fight, rather, you know, those are another 2 set of guys that are older. You know what I mean? That the loser could be finding himself out of the UFC. You know, these UFC contracts are a one-way street, right? The UFC has all the power. The UFC could choose to cut you whenever they want, if they so choose to do so. They could say, hey, listen, we got the best out of your services. It's time for us to move on. So, you know, Donald, we just eliminate that because we know he's retiring after the fight. But if Joe Lauzon loses, you know, could we be looking at that? If Shogun loses, could we be looking at that? If Ovince St. Preux loses, could we be looking at that? It's very interesting. As far as this fight goes, it's very hard to call because it's not 2 young guys, or it's not an old guy versus young guy where you know that there's a disparity in the athleticism, the explosiveness. It's 2 guys that their best days in terms of athleticism are behind them. So it comes down to a technical thing. If you look at the fight on the ground, I'd give Joe Lauzon the advantage, right? You have to think about what he could do on the ground. But Donald Cerrone, we know, is no scrub on the ground either. It might be a positional thing where if somebody gets knocked down and the guy that's on top might be able to just dominate around on top. It's really going to be very, I think, situational in terms of who wins on the ground. If I had to give it to somebody, I'd say Joe Lauzon on the ground, but Donald Cerrone, we know, is very credible on the ground, very good in the jiu-jitsu department. It's a very close fight to call. You know, if I had to pick, I would actually go with Joe Lauzon in this one. It's tough because the way I look at it with Cowboy, and this isn't affecting me entirely, this isn't swaying my entire opinion or pick for this fight, but it's a big factor. when you look at Donald Cerrone, you have to question whether he's going to show up for this fight. Cowboy's getting a lot of attention in the media for this fight because now people know that he's retiring. People know it's his last fight. You know, we just saw the press conference where he was crying, right? He got very emotional. And again, they put him back on the main card of a pay-per-view, back on a big stage. So this is a fight for Cowboy where it is a big stage again. You know, it's not the big stage that he fought Conor McGregor in, which in that fight he didn't show up because, you know, he felt overwhelmed. That's another big stage that he didn't show up for. Another couple times where he fought for the title and just couldn't pull the trigger. You know, is Cowboy going to melt under the big stage? It makes you wonder, makes you worry a little bit because, again, this is his biggest fight that he's had since the McGregor fight. And what happened in the McGregor fight? What happened in his other big fights before that? You know, that was a stigma too. And Cowboy hasn't been shy in saying that. Cowboy said it in many fights, like, oh, Cowboy doesn't show up for the big one. Cowboy knows it. He knows it's a thing. So that's not going to sway my entire opinion, but does that worry me a little bit when I'm thinking about Cowboy Cerrone in this fight? Yeah, because people are going to be cheering him on like hell. You know, I think I hope he could just block that all off and just fight. You know, I hope if he can do that, I think Cowboy could win because it's a very evenly close fight. But for me, it's so evenly close that I'm just going to give it to Joe Lozon. And I don't know. This is a very pick-em fight for me. You know, Cowboy's the favorite at minus 170. But it's close. It's almost even money. So I think more so interesting in this fight because it's so close inside the octagon, for me at least, is the story of it. And the story is, you know, if Joe Lozon loses, what's next? If Cowboy loses, obviously it doesn't matter because he's retired. But nonetheless, he's retiring, win or lose. So it's an interesting story. Yeah. Similar to that fight, the next fight over, it's a light heavyweight bout, and it's and by the way, the Cowboy versus Lauzon fight is at 155, which to me is shocking. Like, Cowboy really wants to cut all the way down, you know, cut all that weight for his last fight. I guess, you know, he kind of wants to feel reminiscent of what it's like to suffer. But I wouldn't have done that. I would have just taken a fight at 170. I'm sure Joe Lozon wouldn't have minded taking it at 70 if that's the opponent he wanted specifically. But nonetheless, it's shocking to me that it's at lightweight. I thought it would be at welterweight. Cowboy, I don't think, fought at lightweight for a while either. So, interesting. So Shogun Rua versus Ovince St. Preux, back to that one. Again, it's so similar to the first fight because it's two guys that are older now in their careers, right? It's Mauricio Shogun Rua is a guy who is a legend, a pioneer in mixed martial arts, dating all the way back to the Pride days, right? He was a guy who I loved him early on because it seemed like he brought something different inside the octagon always. Ovince St. Preux is a guy who maybe could say untapped potential, never reached it, you know what I mean? But a guy who's always been dangerous. You know, you even look at his fights like against John Jones and was able to go to a decision with him, was able to at least have a decent fight with him. You know, I obviously lost, but there's been moments and flashes in St. Preux's career, especially early on. But two guys are just over the hill at this point. It's obvious. You know, Ovince St. Preux, the minus 235 favorite. And again, I worry for these guys. I say it, but I don't say it to clown or to mock them. I personally worry because I don't want any of these guys to get cut. You know, I don't want any of them to get cut. I think they're all big for MMA. I think they've all been, you know, very enjoyable throughout their careers and giving us great time, so it sucks. But that's the game. You know, that's just business. That's life. You have to move on, and that's how it is sometimes. But, yeah, I mean, these two fights specifically, there's a running narrative that, you know, these are four older guys. You know, we could be seeing – we know one of them's leaving because Cowboy's retiring, but we could be seeing, you know, cup 2, 3, or, you know, two of them gone, you know, after this fight. Maybe 3 if Lozon loses. So obviously the next fight is Michael Chandler versus Tony Ferguson. Is it the people's main event? I don't know. I haven't really heard that go around too much for this one. It's an interesting fight. And what's interesting to me now, looking at the odds for the first time, it's a minus 410 for, back to the pick real quick for Shogun versus Ovince St. Preux. Yeah, Ovince St. Preux, I think, wins this fight. I'm just going to give him the edge. I don't know. It's very similar to the Cowboy versus Joe Lozon fight. I think these guys are just over the hill in terms of athletically. And, you know, it's going to be from a technical standpoint of who pulls the trigger, who executes a game plan best. And I think Ovince St. Preux does that. So far, I got Joe Lozon, Ovince St. Preux. Back to the Ferguson versus Chandler fight. Listen, Tony Ferguson, are his best days behind him? It's interesting. Are Michael Chandler's best days behind him? Because, I mean, look, as good as Chandler looked, he is on a 2-fight losing streak, right? It's an interesting fight because if Tony loses, he's lost 4 in a row. If Chandler loses, he's lost 3 in a row. So, I mean, what do you do at that point? What direction do you go with those guys? Unlike the 2 fights we just talked about earlier, you know, I don't think those guys are in jeopardy of being cut or anything if they lose. They're still big stars. They're still big names in the company and fairly younger, I guess, than those guys. I mean, Tony maybe not, but Tony hasn't necessarily fallen off the face of the earth. He is 38, but he hasn't fallen off the face of the earth. Like, he's losing to guys, but he's not really getting finished, and he's losing to the best guys in the world. You know what I mean? So that's different. But, you know, just looking at the odds here, minus 410 for Chandler, to retort to what we were just saying, it's high. It's high. I mean, I didn't think it was going to be that high. I thought it'd be like a maybe minus 220 for Chandler, something like that. But to see minus 410, it makes me like the money on Tony Ferguson. But that's for betting purposes. If I'm picking straight up, I think Michael Chandler's going to win the fight. But Chandler needs to come in with a proper game plan to win this fight because Chandler has all the tools. Chandler's an explosive guy, very athletic, very in shape. He can strike with you. We know he can wrestle with you. So he's a guy who has it everywhere. He's got it everywhere. He's got all the tools, but he just doesn't put it together sometimes because I don't know if he gets caught up in the moment or if he doesn't come forth with the right game plan, but he's a guy who, if he could just put it together, he can get a big win under his name, just like he did in the Dan Hooker fight. You know what I mean? So Tony is a beast. Tony, if you're expecting this fight to get finished, if you're expecting Chandler to finish Tony, it's not going to happen. Okay? Tony Ferguson is durable. Tony Ferguson got finished in the Gaethje fight, technically got, TKO'd? But that's because the ref stopped that. You know, Herb Dean felt bad and stopped it. Tony Ferguson was still on his feet. When do we see Tony Ferguson get knocked out? Straight up. It doesn't happen, you know. And if it's never happened or if it has happened, it was a long, long time ago that I don't remember. Nobody remembers because Tony Ferguson don't get finished. So I do expect a long fight. I actually think this is going to be a 3-round fight, a 3-round competitive fight. I think Tony looks better because the quality of competition is slightly less from, Oliveira, Dariush, and Gaethje. I don't think Chandler is on their level, but he's not quite as good as those guys. So that's going to benefit Tony. You know what I mean? It's not a warm-up fight, but Tony's going to be able to do more. Or not. It's not a warm-up fight, but what I meant to say is it's not an easy fight. It's not like a fight to get Tony back on track because I'm picking Chandler. But it's going to be a fight where I expect to see Tony do more in this fight. You're going to see a better Tony Ferguson than you did in his last 3 performances. That's what I think. At least in the last 2. Because against Gaethje, he did show flashes, even if he did lose that fight. He hurt Gaethje with a big uppercut in the 2nd round or 3rd round. But yeah, I think Chandler wins a decision. I think Chandler is just going to do what he has to do in this fight and put it together. I think he'll finally do it. He's going to have to wrestle when he has to. He's going to have to keep the fight standing when he has to. And we've seen Tony be hit. Tony gets hit a lot in his fights, standing. Chandler could hit you. Chandler's got power, so I think Tony's going to eat some shots. And in the wrestling, I mean, look, in the jiu-jitsu, obviously, in the jiu-jitsu and in the clinch and everything, all that stuff, I think Tony's got the advantage because he's got nasty elbows. He's got nasty knees. You know, he's very versatile, very unpredictable. But we've seen Tony get taken down by Kevin Lee and ground and pounded. We've seen Tony get beat up bad, botched up bad in the stand-up by even Cowboy for a couple rounds. So, and other guys too. So I think Chandler's going to be able to do enough on the scorecards to win this fight. I think we see a more active Tony Ferguson. I think we see a better performance from Tony Ferguson, but I think Chandler wins the fight. Where do both guys go from here? Listen, again, what if Tony loses, which I'm predicting him to? That's 4 in a row. I mean, you know, it's tough. What do you do with Tony? Do you cut him at that point? Does Tony retire? If I'm Tony personally, I'm retiring if you lose 4 in a row. That's just me. I'm retiring because why stick around at anything less than your best? Like, you're only lying to yourself if you think your best days are ahead of you at 38, 39 years old, 4 losses in a row. You know, Chandler's a little bit different because he's lost 2 in a row and it would be 3, but, you know, he just showed up to the UFC and maybe he wants to prove a little bit more. But still, though, even if Chandler loses, like, the title shots are done. You know, all that stuff is done. He's done as, like, a legit contender in my eyes. But if Tony loses, not only is he done as a legit contender, but he might be done in the UFC, man. Like, who knows? And then this next fight, it's a strawweight bout between Rose Namajunas and Carlos Barza. It's interesting, right? We know, you know, these odds are somewhat close. Rose is a minus 220 favorite. I do think Rose has improved fight to fight, mentally especially, not physically, more so. Obviously, she's getting better because she's training every day like a mixed martial artist. But in terms of the physical aspect of it, or the mental aspect of it rather, Rose has gotten a lot better. You know, you look at her chanting, I'm the best in these past fights against Weili. Like, she's somewhere mentally now where she truly feels that she is the best. Did she truly feel that way when she held the title the first time? I mean, didn't she relinquish? No, she didn't relinquish. She actually lost the belt to Andrade. But afterwards, she said that she was almost relieved to not be champion anymore because she didn't like the pressure of it. If you don't like the pressure of it, is it the media stuff? Probably. She seems like a very down-to-earth person, doesn't like all the cameras in her face and all that. But is there also something to it of maybe she wasn't ready to be the champion mentally because maybe it was new to her? Maybe she's like, I'm the best already? Like, the Joanna fight was a quick shock when she knocked her out in the first round and won the belt. And then she did it again in 5 rounds. You're like, wow, maybe she didn't even believe that yet. But now I think she's at a place mentally where you see her and Rose is like, okay, I'm the best. Like, I got this shit. I'm meant to be champion. This is my time. Unlike the last title reign, like, I know I'm meant to be champion. I know this is my time. So I think that benefits Rose so much going into this fight. When you look at it in the octagon, obviously, Carla Esparza is very good on the ground. You got to give her the advantage. But again, until I see somebody like a Tatiana Suarez come in who's a true specialist and can really control the fight on the ground with her wrestling, I don't see Carla Esparza taking her down and doing enough to win this fight. You know, if Carla Esparza could do it enough and wear Rose down, credit to her. That's obviously going to be her path to victory. If she wins, that's how she's going to do it, I would think, right? But I think Rose is going to be able to keep this fight standing. I expect a Rose finish early, actually. I think Rose is starting to come into her own as champion. I think Rose gets this done within the first 2 rounds by a knockout, KO, TKO. No disrespect to Carla Esparza, but it's like what we just spoke about earlier, man. When you look at it, it's almost like there's a cream of the crop to this division. Like, there's levels to this. And it feels like Joanna, Weili, and Rose are levels above everyone else in that division, all the other contenders. You know, it feels like there's a big gap between, like, the top 2 in the champ and everyone else. So I am going to pick Rose in this one. And now the main event, right? A very close fight, a good fight. It's Charles Oliveira versus Justin Gaethje. Charles being the minus 165 favorite. It is very close. It's kind of a pick-em fight. With Charles Oliveira being the slighted favorite. And I think that's about right. I think the odds makers got this one right. This is an interesting fight because it's like, Justin Gaethje needs to be careful. The Khabib fight, Justin, you know, he got caught. He got submitted on the ground. Charles Oliveira is very different than Khabib in many ways. One of them being that Charles Oliveira is no slouch in the stand-up. We've seen over his last 4 or 5 fights that he's made dramatic improvements in the stand-up. Like, he's a well-rounded mixed martial artist now. He used to be more so of a guy like, oh, be careful with the submission. Huge threat of the submission. Keep the fight standing. Wear him down. Make him quit. He's a guy now that excels in all levels of the fight. All levels of the fight. You know, he won a championship with landing a left hook on Michael Chandler. So he's not to be messed with in any department. And I think that's going to be a big difference in this fight. I think that Charles Oliveira is going to be able to threaten Gaethje enough in the stand-up and be good enough defensively to the point where Gaethje is going to be in trouble. It's going to go on long enough to where he will get taken out eventually and he will get submitted. That's what I think. I got Charles Oliveira by submission. Lock that in, but just take him straight up. Charles Oliveira over Gaethje in terms of the overall arc of the main card picks. But yeah, I mean, look, it's interesting again because what if this fight stays standing? And if this fight stays standing, just the last 2 fights for Oliveira, we saw him get hurt badly by Dustin Poirier. We saw him get hurt badly by Michael Chandler. He almost got finished 2 fights in a row. You know, that's very fair to say that Charles almost lost his last 2 fights. But he didn't quit, right? He didn't have that quit gene, that coward gene like Justin Gaethje claims he has. He didn't show it in those last 2 fights. If Justin Gaethje hurts you, man, what's going to happen? Because I think Justin Gaethje is a far heavier hitter than not far heavier, but Justin Gaethje again, keep saying far, but Justin Gaethje is a fucking heavier hitter than Michael Chandler and Dustin Poirier. He just is. You know, Poirier might have better technique in the boxing. I would think he does. But I don't know. Chandler might be a little bit closer, but Gaethje packs more of a punch. And I think we saw that in the fight against Chandler at MSG. So if this fight stays standing, it's not going to go good for Oliveira if it goes standing long. He's going to have to eventually know, like, okay, I got to take this to the ground, stop messing around. In the Khabib fight, Khabib was a few leg kicks away from being done. Or at least he must have felt that way. And he said, all right, stop fooling around, take this shit to the ground before he breaks my calf. You know what I mean? So I think Oliveira has to be very careful. There's a very fine line between, okay, don't be so blatantly obvious that I'm trying to submit this guy, get him out of there in the grappling, but also keep this fight standing, but don't keep the fight standing too long. So there's a very fine line between that. And I think Oliveira's going to be able to crack that code. He's going to be able to play his game enough on the stand-up to get it to the ground, submit Gaethje, get it done. But man, I mean, who knows, right? What if this fight starts going into the later rounds and, Gaethje's 7, 8 leg kicks deep? One good thing about Oliveira in terms of the leg kicks, though, is Oliveira is very good at defending. Oliveira is very light on that lead foot. Always lifting it, kind of bouncy with it, right? So Justin Gaethje, a lot of times, is going to catch it, but he's not going to catch it planted, which means it's not going to do the most damage that it should. And listen, I mean, if that gets Oliveira off guard, off balance, which it could, he doesn't care. He'll play that game any day of the week. Like come into my fucking, get on top, you're going to be in trouble. So it's interesting because Gaethje can't toe the line either. Both guys can't toe the line in their respective rights. Again, I got Oliveira, but it's such a good fight, man. It just is. It's a good pay-per-view overall, The prelims look good as well. So yeah, let's lock in those main card picks now, okay? I'm 14-2 so far, so you just keep sticking with me, guys. Take those fights straight up if you want to throw it into your parlays, whatever. I'm not telling you who wins by submission, this, that, and the other. We're just tracking my overall record. I'm not even doing it as much for gambling purposes, but I am doing it as much just to have it on this show, a fun thing to have. It's that record's always going to be there. We're going to be tallying it up from the start to the end of the show. And, I think it helps because I'm really doing research on these fights and I'm really trying to give you my best take on it. So I'm not giving you, this guy wins by this round. When I tell you, this guy's winning by submission, second round, I'm just telling you what I think. I'm not telling you to go bet that. But if I am telling you that the guy's going to win, yes, put your money on that. That's what I think. I think the 14-2 record indicates that so far. We're off to a good start. Petr Yan fucked me. We'd be 15-1. That was a robbery. Fuck you, Aljo. I'm joking. But, yeah, man. A good card. 10 o'clock p.m. this Saturday, UFC 274. Let's get into the UFC Vegas 53 card that we just had, the main event in particular, the fight that we just had this past weekend. Wow. What a performance from Cheeto Vera. Rob Font, obviously number 5, taking on number 8 Marlon Cheeto Vera at the time. I'm sure that the rankings have been updated at this point in time, which we will get into in a little bit. But what a fight, guys. Overall, we did call it to a T on this show. I thought Rob Font was probably the better striker, probably the quicker fighter, more explosive. But I thought overall, Cheeto was just going to start to become more successful over time. Not necessarily wear Rob down, which is kind of what happened almost, but Cheeto was just going to be able to just stick with it, play it out throughout the first couple rounds, but just still be there in rounds 4 and 5 and still be there aggressively. And that's what he was. He was still there. We didn't know because we hadn't seen him go into a 5-round fight, but we had also said that based on how he closes out his fights against like Frankie Edgar and other guys where he finishes very strong in rounds 2 and 3, it wasn't a guy that we thought couldn't go rounds 4 and 5. Like I was anticipating Cheeto to still be there in rounds 4 and 5, but I knew Rob Font. We also said Rob Font was going to be there too because he had been there against guys like Cody Garbrandt, Aldo for a hard 5 rounds. But again, we also did say it was a pick'em fight. It was such a close fight. It really could have gone any way. Like, I did pick Cheeto. I like Cheeto. Maybe it could have been hard overhead there. But no, I actually did think Cheeto was going to win. And, what does it say about him? It says that he's as legit as any fucking contender now in the division. That's for damn sure. So, if you talk about the biggest win of his career, you're looking at it, man. That was definitely the biggest win of his career. Now, what is next for Cheeto in terms of it could be Jan, it could be Aldo, it could be Dominic Cruz, it could be TJ Dillashaw. He's not going to get the title shot next, but what he said after his post-fight interview makes perfect sense. Any of the 4 guys, 1 through 4, I'm ready for you. I just beat 5, whatever. If you look at the rankings now, welterweight or at bantamweight rather, Marlon Vera is now 5. So he's moved up 3 spots. It's big for him again. We got Corey Sandhagen too. I didn't include his name. So, what could be next for Marlon Vera? A Corey Sandhagen fight, a Jose Aldo fight, A TJ Dillashaw fight, a Piotr Jan fight, sign me up. You know, is Piotr Jan a great matchup for him if he wants to keep the fight standing? I don't think so. Neither is TJ, you know, all due respect. I think he's going to want to have to, he should fight Aldo next. If he wants to play it safe, fight a guy like Cruz and Aldo next. If you really want to take a risk and leap into that next upper echelon, but know you might take an L, then yeah, fight, Dillashaw, Jan, even fucking Sandhagen. Sandhagen's as good as anyone in that division. So I think he can beat Jose Aldo now if they fought, for example. I think he can beat Dominic Cruz now. So, and those guys are also legends. Those guys are also legends of the game. So they're big fights that could elevate you to title status, right? Like, those wins are just as good as any of those other ones in the top 4. You beat Cruz, you beat Aldo, come on. You might be next, Cheeto, for the title, and you were already in the top 5 anyway. So, knowing Cheeto, he'd probably fight Jan Dillashaw anytime, any place. He's a dog like that. But if he wants to be smart, he could also fight Aldo versus Cruz. 2 guys that maybe aren't what they used to be. Maybe Aldo still looks incredible. Cruz still looks very good. But it's interesting. It's just tough how brutal the sport of mixed martial art is, right? Because you go back to this fight that just happened. And did you guys see Rob Font's face in that fight? Oh, my God, it was so bad. Cheeto, this fight was the obvious volume over power. You know what I mean? Or power over volume, rather. Rob Font was landing way more numbers than Cheeto Vera in this fight. Way more numbers. If the damage wasn't what it was, Rob Font's winning this fight by unanimous decision. But Cheeto was just landing some damaging stuff, and Cheeto was hurting him and dropping him at the end of a couple rounds, at the end of 2-3 of those rounds. And it was huge. Just the damage was just so much more. And then you look after the fight, and Cheeto looks like he almost doesn't have a scratch on his face. Rob Font looks like he'd been in a car accident. Terrible. Or even worse than a car accident. Look like he got beat up with a baseball bat by 5 guys. And the last kick was just, oh my God. I think Cheeto landed a hook kick or something like that. And the back of his, the heel of his foot landed on Rob Font's face. On one of those big fucking lumps he had. And just Rob Font just held his face God knows what that was, man. But, that's a fight where you definitely get rushed right to the hospital afterwards. Dana doesn't play games with that grueling fight. Because I am a fan of Rob Font. I'm a fan of what they're doing over there in Boston or in Massachusetts. And it's tough to see, man. We just talked about not Glover, but Shogun and St. Preux and Cowboy and Lozon. It's tough, man. The sport of MMA is a cruel sport, whether you're getting cut or whether you're getting badly injured, life-damaging injuries, potentially. It's rough. So, obviously, we just said, Cheeto's number 5, right? Look, Cheeto, is he good enough to be champion? At least not yet. Is he good enough to beat a couple of those guys in the top 5? Absolutely. And I'm a big fan of the guy, so I hope that he can just keep improving. And, maybe I'm wrong because, look, truth be told, I was very worried about him even being able to beat Rob Font. But this was a big test for him, and he showed out. He beat Frankie Edgar now, beat Rob Font. How many fights has he won in a row? The guy's starting to pile up some wins here, You got the Grant fight, the O'Malley fight. Let's see how many fights he's won here in a row. So the Song Yudong fight, he lost, but that was bullshit. Anybody who saw the Marlon Vera versus Song Yudong fight knows that Cheeto won that fight. It just goes back to the bad judges. So he beat O'Malley, right? So he lost to Aldo. He beat Davey Grant, he beat Frankie Edgar, and he beat Vera, or Font rather. He's on a 3-fight win streak. So, he's doing well. And keep in mind, he's doing this in, if not the best division in mixed martial arts, maybe the second best. Besides 55 or one of those divisions, or welterweight, It's up there. So it's a Shark Tank, Let's move on to some MMA news now, guys. Some stuff's been going on recently in the world of MMA, and we always like to wrap up the show with some stuff, with some juice, some news, some, the good stuff, the juicy details. Let me just shut up. Conor McGregor rips Tony Ferguson for a rant against Dana White. So anybody who saw the Tony Ferguson press conference yesterday, right? He was doing media for his fight against Justin Gaethje. And, obviously Tony, or his first fight against Michael Chandler, rather, and obviously Tony, wasn't shy to come at Dana White for fighter pay, for all the opportunities he hasn't gotten, and this, that, and the other. And Conor McGregor responded to that via Twitter, and he put, Tony Ferguson, who changes representation around 4 times a year, is saying it's someone else's fault he's in the position he's in. How many bridges do you burn before you look yourself in the mirror and say, maybe it's me that's the issue? God bless you, pal. I'll say a prayer. Interesting thing going on there. If Tony Ferguson can win, what if he fights Conor McGregor? Wouldn't that be a fun fucking fight for Conor McGregor to come back? But again, McGregor wants to fight Usman. I can't for the life of me understand why the UFC. I mean, I can understand why the UFC does it. Ka-ching, obviously. But morally or just from like a infrastructural standpoint, like it doesn't make sense for the sport for Conor to be fighting Usman. But whatever. I mean, pay-per-views got to be sold, right? Charles Oliveira promises epic collision with Justin Gaethje. Guys are not getting the picture. What does he mean by that? Guys are not getting the picture. So I guess Charles Oliveira thinks that guys are sort of underestimating him in the division, that they're kind of sleeping on him. They don't really know what he's fully capable of. And what's the thing about Oliveira is he seems to be a champion with a chip on his shoulder. Now, that's a big upside to have. Like, if you're a champion but you still have a chip on your shoulder, like, man, dangerous. What is this? Jake Paul and Francis Ngannou went on the shop? Jake Paul, Francis Ngannou disagree about the viability of fighters' union across boxing and MMA. So the shop is LeBron James's podcast, if I'm not mistaken, right? So I guess Jake Paul and Ngannou were on the fucking show. And it says here, in a candid conversation from the latest episode of the Sports Emmy Award-winning series The Shop from LeBron James and Maverick Carter's Uninterrupted, Jake Paul argued why he believes fighters' union is the only solution to fix major problems like the massive pay gap between the top athletes in a promotion like the UFC versus the biggest name boxers in the world. Jake says, the fighters can band together, Paul said in an exclusive clip. We can. My ultimate goal is to create fighters' union. It needs to be done. It seems impossible, and maybe it will be, but that's how. People say, Jake, how are you going to create a fighters' union? They'll just shelf all the fighters in the union. No, everyone comes together and we're not fighting. The argument against Paul's idea for a fighters' union is exactly what UFC heavyweight champion Francis Ngannou brought up when the discussion started. As he approaches free agency at the end of 2022, Francis understands the difficulty in standing up to an organization as large as the UFC, especially for fighters who don't have the same kind of leverage that he possesses. They cannot come together, Ngannou countered. It's very complicated. Because financially, if somebody has to rely on you to pay his bills, you're controlling his wallet. How much he gets and you can do whatever you want. Of course, he cannot stand up against you. How are you going to feed those people? Because a lot of them, after 8 months, after 8 weeks of training camp, after 4 months of not fighting, they're broke. Yeah, he makes a very valid point there. I'm going to check that out. If you guys haven't checked that out, check that out on The Shop, LeBron's podcast with Rich Paul. If you're into the whole fighter pay stuff with Jake Paul and Ngannou and all that stuff, then check that out. I'm going to have to do that myself. I did not even know that happened. Alexander Volkanovsky versus Max Holloway 3 targeted for UFC 274. Let's go, baby. Let's go. It's time to show who the real king of the featherweights is. This is why I'm excited. This is the fight that I've been wanting. This is a fight that needs to be made at 145, guys. Alexander Volkanovsky, you got to prove it. You did not beat Max Holloway the second time. There's a reason that you're up 2-0 and there's a trilogy even happening in the first place. It's time to prove that you're actually the best featherweight on the planet, buddy. Time to prove it. Because Max right now, in my opinion, Max is the champion in my eyes. You got to prove it, man. I don't know. Anderson Silva blasts the UFC. They try to use you and kick you out. When I was done in UFC, Anderson says, everybody, especially Dana White, said, oh, Anderson can't fight anymore. Nobody in the same age group with Anderson can fight. It's terrible, blah, blah, blah. And talking a lot of shit about me. I feel disrespected because it doesn't matter. Fighting is fighting. You can win, you can lose. When you make a success of MMA, one thing you need to do for your fighters is give respect. In that, I feel no respect, but I don't care because when I stop fighting, I'm going to stop fighting because I'm going to stop it. Nobody can say for me I should stop. No one can say for anybody you need to stop now. Nobody. I'll stop when I say I'm done. That's the problem for the people in this sport, especially UFC, because UFC doesn't respect the legacy the fighters have. They try to use you and kick you out, and when you're out, they try to destroy your career. The UFC has definitely been under fire recently, man. You know, I mean, whether it's fighter pay, the mistreatment of fighters, Dana and the UFC have been under fire, man. It's crazy. And I think a lot of it's, you know, just deservingly so. I mean, how can you argue it? How can you argue it? That even in the fighter pay, you know, the world heavyweight champion is getting $600,000, you know, and fighters are coming back saying that they have to pay for their own medical bills, their own surgeries from competitions they had in the UFC. I mean, it's just not right. It's not right. Tony Ferguson goes scorched earth on UFC Dana White from the media day. Yeah, I mean, something we just alluded to. Tony's pissed, man. I don't know what it is. I mean, is it he's bitter about the fights now? He's starting to voice his opinion. I mean, I don't know. All I know is Tony needs to focus and get the win this Saturday. It's going to be a big one for him. Cody Garbrandt versus Ronnie Yaya in the works for UFC event on July 9th. I think I spoke to them this, we alluded to this a little bit on Twitter, man. Like, Cody Garbrandt, I hope you win. You know, I've never seen in MMA or let's say in the UFC, let's just say UFC, I've never seen a fighter fall off the face of the earth and come back to become successful, to have some semblance again. I've never seen it. You know, have we seen guys like Poirier and other dudes, you know, lose 2, 3, 4 fights in a row, whatever? Yeah, and come back. But, I mean, you've just fallen off the face of the earth, bro. Like, I don't know what's going to happen with you, dude. I don't know. I mean, I hope you win. They're putting you up against a guy who doesn't really have a threat to knock you out at all. And Yaya, so I hope you win. I think it's a good matchup. And he's finally not fighting killers. He's not ranked anymore, obviously. So if it's a fight he can get back on track, then salvage some of his career. Because he's already been champion. You know, if he could just come back and have like a good stretch of wins. Cody Garbrandt's already been a UFC champion. You've accomplished everything already. If you can come back in the UFC and win this fight against Yaya, who's not the heaviest hitter, it's a decent matchup for you. Get some wins under your belt, man. I mean, just finish off your career the right way. You know, finish off your career with some more wins under your belt. You know, maybe set a couple records or whatever. But you won the belt, so there's not much more for you to accomplish. Just think about it like that, and I think you'll go into your fights a lot more confident and not having to feel like you have to prove something. Chael Sonnen thinks UFC should stop waiting to book Nate Diaz. I think you turn him loose. I mean, say what you want about Diaz. I mean, isn't the Hamza thing? Because obviously Dana White just went on a podcast recently and it took place in the War Room. And people started leaking pictures of the fight cards that are on the big board. And one of them was a UFC fight card that looked absolutely stacked. It was the July fight card, the International Fight Week one. It had Adesanya versus Cannonier. It had Hamza versus Diaz, which I don't want to see that fight, and we're going to get into that in a second. It had Sean Strickland versus Alex Pereira. It was just a crazy card. It had a couple other fights that were bangers too. To talk about that, you know, I don't want to see Hamza fight Nate Diaz. I don't want to see it. I mean, the only thing that makes Hamza versus Nate Diaz only makes sense if Hamza feels that he wants to make a couple of adjustments or have like a warm-up fight leading up to a Covington versus Usman fight. Because the only logical step next is to fight Colby Covington. So if you fight anybody other than Colby Covington, it's a fight to prepare for someone like Colby Covington. That's what you're telling me. Or obviously you just want the money, or it's both. I mean, it's a good opportunity to get both, I guess. But if you're Hamza, I mean, you should be fighting Colby, man. That's a fight to make. I don't know why Nate Diaz would fight Hamza. It just doesn't make sense. It's random. Why fight Nate Diaz other than the money? And I get it. It's the money. So can't complain on that. But yeah, man, I think that's a good closing point for the show. Thank you guys so much for tuning into the show. We'll catch you for the next one.